I am Anna for the most part, but Naya is very close and Aura is still around. I'm gonna say that it's mostly Anna enough for the sake of putting my picture and stuff up there, but just know that Naya is fairly blurry with me. But I'll be talking mostly from my perspective, and I'll clarify if I'm talking more from Naya's perspective or Aura's or anybody else. But I'm an ex-host, I guess, in Collective Mind. I'm a lot of things, but for the purposes of this video, that's probably what I would focus on. And this video is going to be looking at the question of whether or not alters are real people. It's like a few things to get out of the way, like to clarify that I'm not really gonna dig into too deeply, but just to make sure that we say in a video like this for sure. Alters are not imaginary friends. They are clinically different, like the stuff the brain is doing is different than when it's imaginary friends. It is like in the diagnostic criteria, it distinguishes alters from imaginary friends. They're considered entirely clinically separate. They are also not hallucinations or delusions. That is also clarified in the diagnostic criteria for DID, that the symptoms are not better explained by a different disorder, like a disorder involving psychosis, for instance, and dissociative disorders are not the same as disorders that have psychosis and delusions and things like that. And psychosis and delusions are not criteria for DID, and alters don't go away if you take antipsychotics, etc., etc. Again, it's a different brain thing. The brain is doing different things for alters versus delusions, hearing voices, things like that. In a similar vein, it's not just acting different or feeling different in different situations. It's not mood swings. It's not being a different person at work than you are with your friends or your family. Those things are normal. Mood swings have like a range where they're normal and a range where they would be considered a symptom of something like maybe a mood disorder. But there's like a category of mood swings that would be considered normal, unless they become too like clinically significant where they're impairing your life too much. That's usually the bar where something starts to be considered a mental illness instead. But it's also not a personality disorder. DID is a dissociative disorder, which is part of why I think the change in name from multiple personality disorder to dissociative identity disorder is helpful, because multiple personality disorder makes it sound like a personality disorder, and it's not. At first glance, it might seem like the way alters exist and form and like what they are is totally separate from what like a singlet's experience would be of who and what they are and how identity shapes and stuff like that. And there are obviously differences, but the way identity shapes is largely, if not entirely, by experience. It's by the things that happen to you. And alters' identities are shaped in that same way. So one thing that can kind of complicate that, I guess, is alters who split like later on in life might seem like they just suddenly exist already with a personality and an identity. That's pretty common. That will still shape over time, but that is coming from other experiences and stuff that the system has already had that are given to this new alter, essentially. So like when someone splits from me, they have some of my memories, and those are the memories that are shaping them into who they are. this is also what makes alters different from each other. Because of the amnesia component, alters have different experiences from each other. So in the same way that different singlets have different experiences from each other, and that's what makes them different people, alters have different experiences and it makes them different people. But even different perspectives on the same events are essentially different experiences. If you and I were to both be at the same event and experience as close to exactly the same things at that event as possible, we would still potentially come out of that different from each other. So you can have different responses to the same experiences and still have that shape you into a different person. So even the less extreme, like blackout types of amnesia within a system context can still affect like the different identities that different alters will have. Another thing that can kind of complicate this a little bit, comparing alters to singlets, I guess, in terms of how identities form, is that some alters will have more or less experiences than other alters. Like one easy example of this is like a fragment who has just like a few key memories and doesn't really front very often, and spends most of their time reliving those memories in an inner world, for instance. We kind of like to think of it almost as they're more or less developed, like they have developed less of their identity, but that doesn't make them like less real. That doesn't make them less of a person, in a similar way as like a child who hasn't experienced as much as an adult isn't less of a person. Like, it's not a perfect comparison, but as comparisons go, I think it's helpful in this case. But the same type of comparison in terms of alters with more or less experiences in a lot of systems could be made comparing like the host or other frequent fronters to less frequent fronters, just generally. But another thing to keep in mind with that is a lot of systems have inner worlds where alters will still be having experiences in the inner world even if they're not fronting, and those can also shape who you are. In a similar way almost as like the dreams you have are experiences that can shape who you are. Interacting with each other and whatever else we do in our inner world, those are experiences that we have and they affect who we are. So fronting isn't the only thing that can give you experiences that shape who you are, essentially, is my point with that. Something that I kind of touched on when I made the video about the term core is that different systems will often have different perspectives on how they view their system and their alters and what terms they are more or less comfortable with. Some systems see their alters as like fully fledged individuals, some see it as more of like parts of a whole, and some see it somewhere in between. I don't think it is inherently harmful to have either of those perspectives. I think there can be situations where it's harmful. Like an easy example I could think of is if a host, for instance, were struggling a lot with the idea of being part of a system and kept insisting over and over and over that the rest of the alters were just parts of them and not real or like separate in their own right, in such a way that was harming the other alters in the system and invalidating them. I could also potentially see ways that alters could say things like that to lash out. But I could also see it being somewhat comforting, because I could see it helping with some of the issues of having to share a life and sharing time and stuff like that. It might, in some cases, make it easier to work toward common goals as a system instead of trying to work toward each alter's individual goals instead. But this is going to be a case-by-case basis. Another thing we want to point out in this video is that the host or the core, or those aren't interchangeable, but whichever terms you're using that come to mind for the point that I'm going to make, they are also an alter. Everyone in the system is an alter. So there wouldn't be an exception to this. There wouldn't be a host or a core or whoever who is real and the rest are not. Either all of us are real or none of us are. And if you want to say all of us are parts of a whole, not in our case because we're not comfortable with that, but like if that's how you think of it for your system, or you know someone who thinks of it that way, or that's the way that you think about like the general idea of DID or whatever, that would be everyone in the system, including whoever you think of as like fronting the most, whoever you met first, whoever has the body's name, whatever. Whoever you think of as kind of representing the system, I guess. The idea of one real one and the rest being less or not at all real feels like it's probably rooted in the like forced final fusion mentality, the cure mentality of fixing it as fast as possible by making all of the like alters go away, which also comes like one of the ways of using the term core that we are personally uncomfortable with is when it is used to specifically distinguish, like there's the core and then there's the alters, as though the alters are everyone who is like less real than the core or less important in some way than the core. And final fusion is a goal for some systems, but it is not a good fit for every system. We've shared before why we don't believe it's a good fit for our system, certainly not remotely in the near future, but we don't expect it to ever be. But functional multiplicity is a really great option for a lot of systems, and it is becoming far more widely accepted clinically as like one of the treatment paths essentially for DID. In our case, we feel very strongly that we are individuals. We are separate people who cannot be totally separated from each other in the sense of we share a life and we share a body, and there's a different level of responsibility we have to each other because of that, but that doesn't make us less real or less individual. For our system, we are not one broken person, we are many people, and Aura as host now, or I when I was host in childhood, wouldn't have any more right to this life or this body than anyone else in the system. We share it. It's their life and their body too, every single one. And we have a responsibility to each other to not we have the responsibility to not harm each other and to not get needlessly in each other's way. But we kind of have to share this. And it's not fair necessarily, and there's not really a way for us to make it fair. We can't divvy up the time equally. We can't weigh out like how many people want to go into this career versus this one. Not that that's something we have to worry about right now because of our disabilities, but there's not a perfect way to go about that. But at least for us, the solution isn't to pick one person who gets to live their life and everyone else just has to support them whenever they happen to be fronting, or pretend to be them and try to continue in their life. We've kind of tried that, and it didn't work well for us, and we are not interested in that right now. So for us, we are different people. Many, many, many of whom would choose to be entirely separate from the rest if we could, or from at least many of the rest, and would love to have our own lives and be able to make all of our own choices. We're individuals who are essentially forced to live and work and exist together in the most extreme way, essentially, that I can think of. So I guess the term real is complicated in a sense because it can be the opposite of different types of things. Like in terms of real versus fake, we're absolutely real. Real versus imaginary, we're absolutely real. Real versus delusions, again, we would be real. We're not the same as singlets. Like, each alter obviously isn't the same as a singlet, and the system as a whole isn't the same as a singlet, but also no two singlets are the same, so I don't know that that has to mean that we're less real. I think we're real, but we're just different. And that's true of a lot of things and a lot of people. All people. And I think at the very least, it's better for us to think of ourselves that way. And being told externally that we're not would feel like an attack. So we are not comfortable with the idea of anyone trying to correct the way we see ourselves. So if any of you are thinking of doing that in the comments, please don't. We will block people who do that. Like we would any other attack. Some of these videos are harder to make than we expect them to be. I think it's possible we get a little defensive in some of these, preemptively expecting people to be arguing against us in the comments or in other contexts. But I hope this is helpful and validating for some people, some of you who watch it. And if you have comments or questions or anything like that that are respectful and not an attack, we would love to hear from you. We read all of our comments and we respond in some way to all of them, so even if that way is occasionally blocking them. If you liked the video, I hope you'll click the like button to tell us and YouTube that you liked it so that YouTube will show it to more people. The subscribe button also does that. It shows our whole channel to more people, and it helps us a lot. We are getting closer and closer every day to our next subscriber goal, which would be a big milestone that we're really excited about. And as always, we will do another compilation video when we reach our subscriber goal. So if you're looking forward to that and you haven't subscribed yet, then I hope you'll subscribe and even share it with some people who might also want to subscribe. In the description box, we have all kinds of links to our Patreon and our Etsy shop and our wish list and our Discord server and things like that. And we will also put videos up on the screen that you can check out if you haven't seen them yet. And if you have suggestions for videos for us to make, that's another good thing that you can put in comments or on Discord or on Patreon if you're one of our patrons, things like that. We're always looking for ideas, and especially if it's things that you feel like we haven't covered yet, or that you feel like we could cover more aspects of something we've already made a video about. So if you think something deserves a part 2 and you have some ideas for it, we'd love to hear that. So thank you for watching. Bye!